My name is Claire Dawson, and I never thought that the day of my mother's funeral would end with me gasping for air on the living room floor. Grief has a way of hollowing you out, leaving you raw and brittle. But what happened that afternoon carved something darker into me. The service had ended only an hour earlier. People were still lingering in the driveway, exchanging hugs and awkward condolences, balancing paper cups of coffee in one hand and tissues in the other. Inside the house, the air was heavy with flowers and silence, the kind that feels staged, like a photograph that will never be looked at again. I was moving quietly between the rooms, picking up programs that had been left behind and half-empty cups abandoned on the window ledge. That was when Michael appeared in the doorway. He was still wearing his black suit, though the tie was loosened and his shirt collar wilted, as if the weight of the day had pressed it down. His face was tight, jaw-clenched eyes fixed on me like I was the only thing out of place in the house our parents had once filled with laughter. "Claire," he said, voice flat. "Come to the living room, now." I hesitated. My ribs already ached from the tension of holding myself upright through the service. I had spoken to almost no one, only nodded when someone told me, "She's in a better place." But Michael's tone was not one of mourning. It was command impatient and edged. I followed him because I did not want a scene in front of the neighbors still milling near the porch. When I stepped into the living room, Victoria was already there. My sister-in-law had chosen a sleek black dress that seemed more suited for a cocktail party than a funeral. She was sitting with one leg crossed over the other, her arms resting on the chair as if it were a throne. On the coffee table lay a stack of papers neatly arranged, the kind of neatness that screams calculation. Michael closed the door behind me. The click sounded louder than it should have. "Sit," he ordered. I did not. I kept standing, my hands clasped in front of me, the funeral program still folded between my fingers. Victoria leaned forward, her lips curved in something that was not a smile. "We need your signature. This is the mortgage deed. Simple formality. You sign it and we can move on." Her voice dripped with false sweetness, but the steel underneath was unmistakable. I stared at the papers. My heart began to pound, not from grief this time, but from the recognition of a trap. "I am not signing anything today," I said. Michael's eyes narrowed. "Claire, don't make this harder. It is just paperwork." I shook my head. "It is not just paperwork. It is Mom's house. Dad built this place with his own hands. You think I am going to sign it away like it is nothing?" The silence that followed was sharper than shouting. Victoria broke it with a single sentence that chilled me more than the January air that had crept through the walls all morning. "She's useless," she murmured to Michael, not taking her eyes off me. "Make her sign or break her." For a moment, the world tilted. I thought surely I had misheard that grief was distorting everything. But then Michael moved. His hand shoved the papers aside. His foot came forward. The kick landed in my side with such force that I could not breathe. Pain ripped through me, white hot and immediate. I stumbled, crashing against the edge of the sofa before crumpling onto the floor. The sound of my body hitting the wood echoed. My vision blurred. My ribs screamed with every attempt to inhale. I clawed at the floor, trying to push myself up, but another wave of pain pinned me down. Outside, through the haze of agony, I thought I heard a faint voice. A neighbor calling, perhaps. But inside, the only voices were Michael's ragged breathing and Victoria's calm, satisfied tone. "You should have just signed," she said. I was 28 years old when my mother died, and though I had prepared myself for the moment for years while caring for her through illness, nothing truly equips you for the hollowness that follows. My brother Michael had not been around much during those years. He lived in the same town only a few miles away, yet he rarely visited unless there was money to be discussed or some favor to be extracted. His wife Victoria had a way of pulling him like a string, whispering in his ear about opportunities, about image, about how Claire was nothing but a burden. To them, I was the shadow at the edge of their perfect portrait, someone who made no money worth mentioning, who did not have the glossy career or polished suburban home, who only worked part-time at a local clinic as a nurse's aide. But my mother never saw me as small. She used to say I was her steady hand, the one she could count on when the nights grew long and her body betrayed her. While others made excuses, I was there with medication reminders, with home-cooked soup, with quiet company when she no longer wanted to watch television because the sound was too loud. And yet when the funeral ended, it felt as though all that care had been erased, replaced by Michael's narrative that he and Victoria were the true heirs, the real family. Growing up, it had always been this way. Michael was the golden child, praised for grades that were average at best, celebrated for a football career that never made it past high school. I, on the other hand, was told to be quiet at the dinner table, scolded for being too sensitive, excluded from photos under the pretense that I was not smiling right. Family albums sit on the shelves even now, where page after page shows Michael and my parents, and then gaps where I should have been, as if someone had cropped me out. When Dad passed away years earlier, the imbalance only grew. Michael became the man of the house, Victoria stepping in with a firm grip that extended to finances and decisions that had nothing to do with her. I learned to keep my head down, to focus on Mom, to preserve what little peace could be salvaged. But beneath that surface, resentment fermented. Michael borrowed money he never repaid. He pressured Mom into signing documents she did not fully understand. Victoria dropped hints at gatherings that Claire was unstable, too emotional, not capable of managing a house on her own. It was death by 1,000 small cuts, the kind of dismissal that is invisible to outsiders but burns you hollow inside. By the time Mom's health declined sharply, I was carrying most of the household costs on my small income, covering utilities and groceries when insurance payments were delayed. I never boasted about it, never demanded acknowledgement. I did it because it was right, because someone had to keep the lights on and the heat running. Yet when Mom finally passed, it was Michael and Victoria who stood tall at the service, accepting condolences as though they alone had walked with her through every late night and hospital visit. I stood off to the side, holding my niece's coat, unseen once again. This history is important because it explains why what happened after the funeral was not a sudden betrayal, but the climax of years of erasure. It was not about a single house or a stack of papers. It was about a pattern that had defined my life in that family, a pattern where Michael took and Victoria directed, and I was expected to vanish quietly. The house symbolized everything. It was the only tangible piece of our parents' lives left behind, built by Dad's calloused hands, painted by Mom's careful brushstrokes. Losing that house would mean losing the last proof that I had ever belonged, that I had ever mattered. To Michael, it was leverage. To Victoria, it was profit. To me, it was home. That is why the demand for my signature was more than just paperwork. It was a demand that I erase myself, fully sign away the last fragment of identity I had clung to. And when I refused, the violence that followed was not just about a broken rib. It was about breaking the quiet resistance I had maintained my whole life. They wanted submission. I gave them defiance. And in that defiance, even as I lay on the floor gasping for air, the story that would follow truly began. The house felt colder after the funeral, not because of the January air, but because of the silence that followed. I returned to my small apartment 2 days later with swollen ribs and bruises already blooming across my skin, trying to convince myself that maybe things would quiet down if I simply stayed away. But Michael never let things go. A few nights later, my phone buzzed with a message from him. No greeting, no acknowledgement of what he had done, no inquiry into how I was holding up after losing our mother. Just a single sentence that appeared on the screen like a commandment carved in stone. Family needs to meet about the house. Tuesday, 5 p.m. It was not a request. It was not even a conversation starter. It was an order. My hands shook as I read it over and over again, trying to decide if this was some twisted joke. I had not spoken to him since the funeral, not even a shallow exchange of pleasantries, and now he expected me to show up like nothing had happened, like my body was not still aching from his boot. I almost deleted the message, almost told myself that there was no reason to walk into whatever trap he and Victoria were setting. But then I remembered the folder sitting in the bottom drawer of my desk, a thick manila envelope stuffed with receipts, utility bills, and tax documents with my name on them. Proof that I had carried more weight than either of them ever admitted. Proof that I had helped keep that house afloat when Mom's illness drained every penny. Proof that I had been present when Michael was nowhere to be found. I dug it out from under stacks of old medical paperwork and set it on the table. The edges were worn from years of being moved around. The ink faded on some of the receipts, but the truth was still there. I told myself that if I went to that meeting, at least I would not arrive empty-handed. At least I could show them that I was not the ghost they painted me to be. The days leading up to Tuesday were restless. I moved through my shifts at the clinic in a haze, adjusting IVs and checking blood pressure, while my mind circled the inevitable confrontation. I tried to imagine what they would say, how Victoria's voice would drip with disdain, how Michael would avoid eye contact until anger took over. Every scenario ended the same way, with me being cornered and them demanding what they believed they were entitled to. By the time Tuesday arrived, the winter air clung heavy with dampness, leaving a thin layer of frost on my car windshield as I scraped it clean. I drove toward the old house with my chest tight, the manila folder riding shotgun beside me like a silent ally. Each block closer made my stomach churn, but I forced myself onward. When I pulled into the driveway, the porch light was already on, casting a sickly yellow glow across the yard. The house looked smaller than I remembered, tired and sagging at the edges, but still filled with the echoes of our childhood. I stepped onto the porch and inhaled deeply. The cedar siding still carried the faint smell of polish Dad used to apply every summer, and for a moment I was 10 years old again, standing beside him with a brush in hand, feeling proud that I was helping. That memory gave me the courage to knock. The sound echoed through the old hallway, and within seconds, the door creaked open. Victoria was standing there, her smile painted on like a mask. "Claire," she said, as though the word itself was distasteful. "You came." Behind her, I could see Michael pacing in the dining room, shoulders hunched, movements restless. On the table sat another stack of papers, crisp and waiting the bait in their carefully laid snare. I stepped inside, clutching the folder under my arm, telling myself again and again that I was only there to listen, that I could walk away at any time, that this time I would not be silenced. I did not yet know that this was not a meeting at all. It was an ambush. The dining room smelled faintly of lemon polish, the same polish Dad used every Saturday when he insisted that the table should shine even if no one was coming over. Now that table carried a different weight, stacked with documents that gleamed under the overhead light. Victoria gestured to the empty chair across from her, as if she were hosting some polite tea gathering, not a confrontation with blood still drying in the cracks of our family. "Sit down, Claire," she said, her voice syrupy but edged with command. I lowered myself carefully, my ribs still tender, but I did not put the folder on the table. I kept it clutched tightly in my lap. Michael finally stopped pacing and dropped heavily into the chair beside his wife, refusing to look directly at me. The lawyerly neatness of the papers was unsettling, each page clipped, signatures in place seals pressed firmly. Victoria slid one across to me with the casual grace of someone passing a salt shaker. "This is a mortgage adjustment," she said smoothly. "The house is under strain. We need your cooperation to keep it." I scanned the document and froze. At the bottom, in faint but recognizable strokes, was my mother's signature. Only it was wrong. The tilt was off, the spacing uneven, the curl of the final letter unfamiliar. My heart thudded painfully against my cracked ribs. "Did Mom sign this before she died?" I asked, my voice breaking. Victoria did not blink. She agreed to it. "You know how she always believed in family unity." Michael rubbed his forehead like a man nursing a headache. "Claire, don't start again. You always overthink. This is just to protect the house." I pushed the paper back across the table. "That is not her signature." Victoria's eyes hardened. "You are not in a position to delay. You don't even live here. Why should you decide what happens to this property?" The words landed like blows, each one stripping away another layer of belonging. I swallowed hard, my throat tight. "I need time," I whispered. "There is no time," she snapped, her veneer of sweetness gone. "If you don't sign today, we lose our chance." My chair screeched against the floor as I stood. "I am not signing anything tonight." Their silence followed me out, thick and suffocating. I walked quickly toward the door, my folder pressed against my chest like armor. The following day confirmed what I already knew: they had begun the process of erasing me. I attended the memorial service they organized without including me in any planning. At the entrance, a stack of programs was handed to me by a stranger. I flipped through and found no mention of my name. The slideshow rolled on as people sipped weak punch from plastic cups. Images of Michael and Victoria smiling beside Mom at holidays, cutting cake sitting in the hospital room near her bed. Their faces everywhere, their presence exaggerated their devotion staged. I was nowhere. Not in the Christmas photos, not in the summer picnics, not even in the hospital moments where I had sat for hours holding her hand. My chest burned with an emptiness deeper than grief. When the microphone was opened for anyone who wished to share, I walked toward it with trembling legs. I did not have a speech prepared, only a memory of the time Dad and I tried to fix the old lawnmower, ending up with grease smeared across our faces, and laughter that shook the yard. It was simple human real. I reached for the microphone, but before I could speak, Victoria stepped smoothly into place. "Let us keep this about Mom," she said, her voice gentle enough to sound reasonable but firm enough to deny me. She took the microphone from my hand and turned away. The murmurs in the room were polite, awkward. I returned to the back, my body shaking, my throat too dry to swallow. In that moment, I realized they had been planning my erasure long before Mom's funeral. It was not an accident of omission. It was deliberate, thorough, and cruel. By the time I returned to my apartment that night, the silence felt like it would suffocate me. I sat on the floor with an old photo album flipping through until I found one of me at 7 years old, perched on Dad's lap in front of the fireplace, looking up at him as though he held the moon. I pressed my fingers to the page. "You still see me, don't you?" I whispered. No tears came. Not yet. Instead, I opened the folder I had carried to the meeting. Receipts, tax notices, utility bills, each one a testimony that I had been present, that I had mattered. At the very bottom was a yellowed sticky note in Mom's handwriting. "You are the quiet in this house. Never forget your steadiness." My chest ached. Maybe I was not invisible. Maybe they only wanted me to believe that I was. That night, for the first time, I stopped wondering if I was exaggerating. I understood clearly that I was being erased piece by piece, and that if I did not fight, there would be nothing left of me in this family's history. The tension that had been simmering between us finally erupted the following week when Michael demanded another meeting. He claimed it was to finalize details about the house, but I knew it was just another opportunity to corner me. My ribs still ached from the first kick, yet I went because I was tired of being painted as the unreasonable one. If I refused, they would twist it into proof that I was unstable, that I had abandoned family duty. The evening was damp, the sky heavy with clouds when I walked up the familiar steps of the house. The porch light glowed dim, flickering like it too was weary of the conflict. Michael was pacing in the hallway, his movements sharp, restless, his jaw clenched. Victoria stood behind him, her arms folded, her eyes fixed on me with that same look of cold triumph she had worn at the memorial slideshow. The table in the dining room once again bore the burden of documents. My folder was tucked under my arm, but I did not place it down. "We are not doing this again," I said quietly. "I told you I am not signing anything." Michael stepped closer, his shadow looming. "Claire, stop being dramatic. This is for everyone's good." Victoria's voice slid in like oil on water. "You are dragging us down, Claire. You never contributed as much as you think. This is Michael's responsibility now. Stop making it harder." My hands shook, but I held my ground. I paid taxes when Dad was sick. I covered bills when Mom's insurance fell short. I was here. Where were you? The silence cracked into anger. Michael slammed his fist against the table, rattling the coffee cups still sitting there. "Enough. You are nothing but a leech. You don't get to dictate terms in this family." I felt my throat tighten, but forced the words out. "I am not signing away the only thing Mom and Dad left behind." His eyes burned, and for a moment I saw not my brother but a man cornered, desperate, furious at losing control. Victoria's smirk deepened. "She is useless, Michael. End this. Make her sign or break her." The room seemed to tilt. My body tensed as he lunged forward, grabbing my arm. I tried to pull away, but his grip was iron. He shoved me against the wall, his face inches from mine, his breath sour with rage. Pain seared through my side as he pressed harder. "Sign the paper, Claire," he growled. "Do it or you will regret this." I shook my head, my voice trembling. "No." The next moment blurred. His foot came up slamming into my ribs with brutal force. The air ripped from my lungs. I crumpled to the floor, gasping, clutching at my side as agony flooded me. My vision flickered spots dancing before my eyes. Every breath felt like knives. I could hear Victoria's calm voice above me, smooth and satisfied. "Told you. She just needs convincing." Michael kicked the papers across the floor, crouching beside me. "This is on you," he spat. "You could have made it easy." My body refused to move. I tried to crawl toward the door, but the pain chained me down. From somewhere distant, I heard the slam of a screen door, the muffled call of a voice. At first, I thought it was in my head, but then it grew clearer. "Hey, is everything all right in there?" It was Mr. Reynolds, the neighbor who had lived next door for as long as I could remember, a retired veteran with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense tone. Michael froze. Victoria straightened her mask, faltering for a split second. "We are fine," she called back, her voice falsely cheerful. But Mr. Reynolds was not fooled. Sounded like someone was hurt. "I am calling 911. Panic flickered across Michael's face. He stepped back, releasing me, his chest heaving. Victoria hissed at him under her breath, but it was too late. The damage was done. I lay on the floor, clutching my ribs, the papers scattered around me like debris from a storm. My breath came shallow, each inhale a battle. I could hear sirens faint in the distance, growing closer. Victoria's expression hardened. "Get rid of her story before anyone believes it," she whispered urgently to Michael. But when the front door burst open minutes later and uniformed officers rushed in, there was no hiding the truth. They saw me collapsed on the floor, bruised, barely able to speak. They saw Michael standing above me, fists still clenched, eyes wild. They saw Victoria with her arms crossed defiant, but unable to disguise the satisfaction in her face. The officers ordered Michael back, their voices sharp, commanding. One of them knelt beside me, asking my name, asking if I could breathe. I wanted to answer, but my voice cracked with pain. All I managed was a weak nod. The paramedics followed quickly, lifting me onto a gurney as my world spun and blurred. The last thing I remember before the darkness closed in was Victoria's voice, cold and unrepentant. "You should have just signed." And then the weight of the night carried me into silence, my body broken. My ribs shattered, but somewhere deep inside my refusal still intact. I had not signed. And that small act of defiance, though it left me bloodied on the floor, was the spark of a fight I had not yet realized I had the strength to finish. When consciousness returned, it was in fragments, pieces of sound and light that did not quite connect. The sterile hum of machines, the sharp scent of antiseptic, the low murmur of voices somewhere nearby. My ribs throbbed with every breath, a relentless reminder of what had happened, and when I tried to move, a jagged pain shot through my chest so severe that it forced a cry from my lips. A nurse appeared quickly, her face kind but steady, and she placed a gentle hand on my shoulder. "You are safe now," she said. Safe was not a word I believed in anymore, but the softness of her tone kept me still. She checked the monitors, adjusted my IV, and explained that I had been brought in with fractured ribs and severe bruising. Protocol required them to notify law enforcement immediately, since injuries consistent with domestic violence could not be ignored. That was when the officer entered, a middle-aged man with a notepad in hand. He introduced himself and asked if I felt strong enough to answer a few questions. My throat was dry, my voice faint, but I nodded. He asked what had happened. He asked who had done this to me. The words tasted like metal as I forced them out. My brother, Michael Dawson, and his wife, Victoria. They wanted me to sign mortgage papers for my mother's house. The officer scribbled, his face unreadable. "Did you sign?" "No," I whispered, each syllable painful. "I refused." He nodded slowly, promising an investigation, but I had heard promises before and did not let hope take root too quickly. When he left, the nurse returned with water and told me I needed to rest. Alone in the quiet, I turned my head and saw the manila folder on the bedside table. Somehow, in the chaos, it had not been taken from me. My shaking hands reached for it, pulling it close. Inside were the receipts, the bills, the documents that proved I had supported the house when no one else had. And tucked into the back pocket was something I had nearly forgotten, a folded letter in my mother's handwriting. My eyes blurred as I opened it, the ink faded but still legible. Claire, you are the one who stayed. This house is yours. The words pierced deeper than any wound. It was not a legal will, but it was my mother's truth, and for the first time since the funeral, I felt a flicker of warmth in my chest. She had seen me. She had known. Tears slid silently across my cheeks, not from the pain in my ribs, but from the validation of those simple sentences. She had trusted me to stand firm, and I had. Even as Michael's boot cracked against my bones, I had not given them what they wanted. The next day, detectives came back, cameras flashing as they documented my bruises, measuring the purple swell of my ribs, photographing the cuts on my arms. They asked me to recount everything again, step by step. I told them about the meetings, the forged signature Victoria's words urging Michael to break me, and the kick that dropped me to the floor. They listened, not rushing, though I could see the skepticism flicker in their eyes when I mentioned the letter. To them, it was sentiment, not evidence, but to me, it was a lifeline. When they left, I lay back against the pillows, exhaustion flooding me, but in the silence, a thought began to grow. If they could erase me from photos, from programs, from memories, then I needed to make sure the evidence of my existence was louder than their lies. That night, I asked the nurse if I could have access to my personal belongings, including my phone. When she brought them to me, I began taking pictures of every document in my folder, carefully labeling each one. I sent them to my email and backed them up to a cloud account I had barely used before. Every click of the camera was an act of defiance. Every file uploaded a small shield against the erasure that Michael and Victoria had tried to impose. Pain racked my body, but purpose steadied my hand. Later, when the room darkened and the hallways quieted, I lay awake staring at the ceiling. My body was broken, but my will was not. For years, I had let them convince me that I was overreacting, that I was too sensitive, that my presence did not matter. But lying there with the letter on my chest and the folder beside me, I knew the truth. I mattered. I always had, and this was not going to end with me signing away the last piece of my family's legacy. It would end with me standing up, broken ribs and all, and telling the world exactly what they had done. The hospital discharged me after a few days with strict instructions not to lift anything heavy and to breathe deeply every hour so my lungs would not collapse from the fractured ribs. Every step I took was lined with pain, but each throb was also a reminder of why I could not back down. Mr. Reynolds, the neighbor who had called 911, drove me back to my small apartment in his rusted pickup truck. He did not say much, but before I got out, he placed a small grocery bag on my lap. Inside were 2 cans of soup and a note scribbled in his blocky handwriting. "Stay strong. They cannot erase you." I carried that note inside with me like it was a medal. Once the door closed and I was alone, I placed the manila folder on the kitchen table and stared at it. My mother's letter rested inside, fragile but powerful. I realized then that memory alone would not save me. I needed proof, hard evidence that could stand in a courtroom and speak louder than Victoria's sneer or Michael's fists. I pulled my old laptop onto the table and began scanning every receipt, every utility bill, every tax slip that bore my name. Hours passed as I fed one page after another into the small scanner, each whirring sound giving me more confidence. I created folders, labeled them by year, cross-referenced with dates from my bank statements. By the time the sun began to rise, I had built a digital wall around myself, a fortress of truth that they could not dismantle with whispers. But I knew I needed more than documents. I needed legal backing. That was when I remembered Ava Carter. She was a young attorney I had met briefly at the community clinic where I worked. She had handled a case for one of our patients involving housing fraud and had left her card with me months earlier. I dug it out of my purse, fingers trembling as I dialed her number. To my surprise, she answered on the second ring. "Claire, are you okay?" Her voice was clear, professional, but not cold. I told her everything in a rush, the funeral, the forged papers, the kick, the hospital. She listened quietly, asking only a few pointed questions. When I mentioned the letter from my mother, she did not dismiss it as sentimental. Instead, she said, "It might not carry legal weight, but combined with your financial records, it paints a picture. That picture matters." She asked me to bring everything to her office the next day. The building was small, a converted red brick house that smelled faintly of coffee and old books. Ava welcomed me with a firm handshake and eyes that carried no judgment. I handed her the folder and watched as she examined each document. When she reached the supposed mortgage deed Michael and Victoria had tried to force on me, her eyebrows knit together. "This signature is suspicious," she said, tilting the page toward the light. "Look at the slope here, the inconsistency in the pressure. This could easily be challenged as forgery." My ribs still ached, but my chest swelled with something like relief. For once, someone saw what I saw. Ava looked up at me, her tone steady. "Claire, you have more than you realize. The receipts, the bills, the letter, even the fact that you were hospitalized as a result of coercion, all of it builds a case. They wanted you to believe you had nothing, but you have plenty." She leaned back in her chair. "The question is, are you willing to fight?" I did not hesitate. "Yes." She nodded. "Then we start here." Over the next hour, she outlined the steps: secure all evidence in multiple formats, file a preliminary motion to contest the mortgage, prepare a statement for law enforcement that included every incident of coercion and abuse. I scribbled notes through the fog of painkillers, each instruction a lifeline. When I left her office, the cold air bit at my face, but it did not feel suffocating. It felt clarifying. Back at home, I spread the papers across my bed, arranging them into categories. Photos of bruises I had taken on my phone, receipts of utility bills, copies of emails Michael had sent demanding I trust Victoria with the paperwork. I even unearthed an old voicemail from Victoria telling me not to drag this out. I labeled it all meticulously. My small apartment looked less like a home and more like a command center. Still, there were moments when doubt crept in. When the pain in my ribs flared so hot I could barely breathe, when the weight of years of erasure whispered that I was wasting my time. In those moments, I pulled out Mom's letter and read the words again. "You are the one who stayed. This house is yours." Each time it steadied me. They had tried to break me, but all they had done was awaken a fight I never knew I had. The first sign of their counterattack came late on a Thursday night when my phone buzzed with a notification from a friend at church. She sent a message that read, "Claire, are you okay? People are saying things online." Confused, I opened the link she attached and felt my stomach drop. It was a video posted in the private Facebook group of our local church community, a place where gossip often simmered but rarely boiled over. The clip showed me sitting on my bed, hair disheveled, eyes red from crying, speaking in a shaky voice. The words were familiar because they were mine, recorded months earlier when Victoria had suggested I document my feelings as therapy. But this version had been sliced and rearranged until it became something sinister. In the clip, my voice trembled. I don't know what's real anymore. Maybe I imagined it all. Out of context, it looked like a confession, like proof that I was unstable. The caption beneath it read, "Claire Dawson admits she fabricated abuse claims. Greedy sister tries to steal family home." My chest constricted harder than my ribs ever had. The comments were already filling with judgment. "So sad, but she clearly needs help. Always knew she was dramatic. Unstable people should not be in charge of property." My hands shook as I read them, shame burning through me. It was not just an attack on my credibility. It was an attempt to erase me in the eyes of the very community where I had once been invisible but safe. For a few minutes I could not breathe, convinced that they had finally succeeded. But then anger surged clean and sharp. I remembered Ava's advice document, everything. I pulled out my laptop and opened the original unedited recording, a 40-minute video where I had poured out my grief after Mom's death. I lined it up beside the manipulated clip, and the difference was undeniable. Metadata confirmed the file's creation date, proving that Victoria had access and had tampered with it. I forwarded everything to Ava with shaking hands. She called me within the hour, her voice tight with controlled fury. "This is defamation, Claire. We will file immediately, and we will send a cease and desist to both Michael and Victoria." Relief fluttered through me, but so did fear. The damage was already rippling through the community. At the clinic where I worked, whispers followed me in the hallways. Patients averted their eyes. Even the pastor's wife, who once hugged me every Sunday, sent a short message suggesting I take a break from attending services until things settled. The isolation cut deep, but it only steeled my resolve. That evening, I created a folder titled Smear Campaign Evidence. I filled it with screenshots of the video comments, metadata reports, and even an old message from Victoria offering to edit the recordings for clarity. Her words, once manipulative kindness, now stood as proof of her deceit. I sent a copy of the entire folder to Ava, then backed it up on 3 separate drives. They wanted to bury me, but I was not going to let them control the narrative. The next morning, Ava filed the motion. She also advised me to keep a low profile, but I could not resist one small act of defiance. I drafted an email addressed only to Victoria. The subject line read, "Proof of defamation." The body contained one sentence. "You should know by now I document everything." I attached the comparison video and metadata report and hit send. Hours later, I received a reply. Short, cold. "You've always been dramatic. But fine, you want to go public. Let's play." I stared at those words, my heart pounding. They were not a denial. They were not even a defense. They were proof that she was rattled. For the first time, I felt the balance shift. It was not much, just a sliver of power, but it was mine. I did not reply. Instead, I turned my focus back to preparation. I printed the evidence, organized it into binders, and placed them in a fireproof box under my bed. I uploaded copies to secure cloud accounts. I told myself that even if they tried to destroy my reputation again, the truth was already louder than their lies. Late that night, when the pain in my ribs flared and exhaustion threatened to swallow me, I sat at my kitchen table with Mom's letter in my hand. Her words echoed in my chest. "This house is yours." They had tried to make me invisible. Now I was visible in the only way that mattered. I was fighting back. The courthouse smelled of old wood and cold air, the kind of scent that clung to government buildings where lives were dissected in front of strangers. I arrived early, clutching the folder Ava had helped me prepare, though she had insisted she would handle everything. Still, I needed it in my hands, the weight of evidence like armor across my chest. Mr. Reynolds drove me his truck, rattling the whole way, but his presence silent and steady. "You already won when you didn't stay silent," he said as we pulled into the lot. I carried those words inside like a shield as I stepped into the building. Ava met me at the security line, her dark suit pressed, her leather folder tucked firmly under her arm. She looked me straight in the eye. "Are you ready?" "As ready as I will ever be," I whispered. Inside the courtroom, rows of benches were already filling with neighbors, reporters, and even church members who had whispered about me for months. Some avoided my gaze. Others offered tight nods of support. At the defense table sat Michael and Victoria. He looked thinner, jittery, his eyes darting to the floor. She was composed, her face carved from stone, dressed in navy like she belonged in a boardroom instead of a fraud hearing. When the judge entered, we rose. The sound of the gavel struck like a thunderclap, and the proceedings began. Ava opened calmly, her voice clear, controlled. She laid out the facts: the mortgage document signed when I was a minor, the forged signatures, the coercion, the hospitalization. She displayed photos of my bruises, medical reports, even the voicemail where Victoria's voice ordered me not to drag things out. The room was silent, but for Ava's steady cadence. Then came the recording. Mr. Reynolds had captured it weeks earlier, his backyard audio of Michael and Victoria discussing me as disposable. Ava pressed play. The crackle of wind, the chirp of birds, and then the damning words. Michael's voice sharp. "She's always been the weakest link." Victoria's cold reply. "Once she signs, we sell it." "She's disposable." Gasps rippled through the room. Some covered their mouths, others whispered. I did not move. I kept my eyes fixed on Victoria. For the first time, I saw the smallest flicker in her expression, a tightening of the jaw, a blink held too long. The judge leaned forward. "Mrs. Dawson," he said, his voice stern, "is that your voice?" She remained silent. "Mrs. Dawson," he repeated, sharper. Still nothing. The silence condemned her more than words ever could. When the defense attorney finally rose, his arguments felt thin. He called me unstable, claimed I had fabricated abuse, painted me as jealous of Victoria's role in the family. It might have landed if the evidence had not already been laid bare. I laughed, a short, bitter sound that startled even me. Heads turned. I did not apologize. The judge watched closely, unimpressed by the flimsy deflections. Then it was Michael's turn. He took the stand with shoulders hunched, sweat darkening his collar. Sworn in, his voice cracked before the first question was finished. When you confronted your sister in the house, the judge asked, "Did you lay hands on her?" Michael hesitated, then nodded slowly. "Yes, sir. I was overwhelmed. I didn't mean to hurt her, but I did." The judge's eyes narrowed. "And did you hear your wife instruct you to end her, as the recording suggests?" Michael stared at his shoes. "Yes." The courtroom erupted in murmurs. Victoria's composure cracked, a flush rising to her cheeks as she glared at him. But Michael did not look at her. He looked small, defeated. The judge called for a recess. Outside in the hallway, I sat on a bench with Ava, sipping a paper cup of coffee gone cold. The air buzzed with reporters, whispering pens, scratching neighbors, staring. I kept my focus on the tiled floor, grounding myself in the simple truth. I had told my story, and they had heard it. When we returned, the judgment came swift and final. In the matter of Dawson versus Dawson, the judge began, his voice carrying through every corner of the room. This court finds the mortgage agreement void, signed by a legal minor without proper consent. Furthermore, the court acknowledges coercion, physical abuse, and attempted fraud. He turned his gaze to Michael. "Mr. Dawson, you are sentenced to a 1-year suspended sentence, 200 hours of community service, and mandatory counseling. You are to remain under a restraining order from Ms. Claire Dawson for a minimum of 5 years." Michael bowed his head, the weight of shame bending him further. The judge shifted to Victoria. "Mrs. Dawson, this court finds you guilty of civil fraud. You are hereby ordered to pay restitution fined accordingly and barred from claiming any ownership of the property in question. The deed will be restored in full to Ms. Claire Dawson." My ears rang with the silence that followed, a silence thicker than any shout. The gavel struck once final and sharp. It was over. Michael slumped, his face pale. Victoria stared straight ahead, refusing to meet my eyes. I did not cry, not when the verdict was read, not when neighbors murmured about justice, not even when Ava squeezed my arm in quiet triumph. I sat still, letting the truth settle into my bones. Outside, the courthouse microphones thrust toward me, questions flying. I kept walking, ignoring them all, until a young woman touched my elbow gently. She looked about 20, a college student, maybe, her eyes wide. She pressed a small envelope into my hand. "Thank you," she whispered, "for showing me I am not weak." Then she was gone. Inside the envelope was a note scrawled on lined paper. "My sister took everything from me, too. Maybe now I can start fighting back." My chest ached, but not from the ribs this time. It was something deeper, a crack that allowed light to enter. For once, the weight of silence was gone. For once, I was seen. The first morning back at the house felt surreal. I pulled into the driveway with the old keys clutched in my hand, the same ones I had carried on a chain since high school, and for a moment I just sat in the car, staring at the porch. The boards still sagged in the same places, the paint still flaked where weather had eaten through, and yet it felt transformed. Not because the house had changed, but because for the first time it truly belonged to me. I stepped onto the porch slowly, the weight of memory pressing against me. Dad's voice echoed in my mind, his lectures about integrity while sanding the railings, his laughter as he handed me a brush dripping with stain. I ran my fingers along the wood, inhaling the faint scent of cedar that still clung to it. Inside, the air was musty, tinged with lemon polish and dust. Boxes sat half-packed from when Victoria had tried to stage her control clothing folded too neatly, a plant drooping by the door. She had left quickly after the judgment, rolling her suitcase away, without a word, the door clicking shut behind her. The silence that filled the house now was not suffocating. It was sacred. I walked room to room, touching walls, opening blinds, letting light spill in. In the living room, I sat on the sofa where Michael had once loomed above me, fists clenched, and I whispered, "You did not win." My chest still ached from the healing ribs, but the ache was no longer despair. It was proof that I had survived. Days blurred into weeks as I began to reclaim the house. I repainted the front hallway, not stark white like Victoria would have chosen, but soft ivory, the same shade Mom had loved. I hung a photo of me at 6 years old on the porch swing, barefoot, and laughing Dad grinning beside me just out of frame. Above it, I taped a note I had found in his old toolbox, the handwriting crooked but certain. "This house is yours, Tally." Every time I passed it, my spine straightened. Neighbors who had once looked away began to greet me again. Some came with casseroles, others with hesitant apologies. Mr. Reynolds appeared with a small pot of lavender, placing it on the porch without ceremony. "Every house needs something living," he said simply. I thanked him, my throat tight. One afternoon, as I swept the steps, a small figure came bounding up the walkway. It was Emma, my niece, Michael's youngest daughter. She stopped at the top stair, clutching a piece of paper in her hand. "Auntie, can I visit sometimes?" she asked, her voice hopeful. I knelt, despite the ache in my ribs, and brushed a strand of hair from her face. "Only if next time you draw me inside the house, not outside under the tree." She grinned and handed me the paper. It was a drawing of the house this time with 4 figures inside, Dad, Mom, Emma, and me. My eyes stung as I hugged her. "It's perfect," I whispered. When she ran off, I folded the drawing carefully and placed it next to Mom's letter. Even in broken families, innocence has a way of cutting through the lies. At night, I sat on the porch swing with a mug of tea, the new light fixture casting a warm glow over the steps. The wind pushed against the windows, carrying the same creaks and sighs the house had always made. But instead of fearing those sounds, I listened. They were not ghosts of erasure. They were echoes of belonging. Sometimes I pulled out the recorder I had found in Dad's box and played his old message. "Claire is the one who stayed. She understands this house is built from more than nails." Hearing his voice fill the walls reminded me that even beyond the grave he had fought for me. Word of the case spread further than I expected. A local journalist had written about it, and within weeks I was contacted by women's groups asking if I would speak on financial abuse and coercion within families. At first, I hesitated, unsure if I wanted to open wounds publicly, but then I remembered the note from the young woman outside the courthouse and the look in her eyes when she said I was not weak. So I said yes. The first session was small, only 5 women in a church basement smelling of coffee and rain. I read aloud the letter I had once written, but never shared the one titled, "When You Are Erased by Family." No one clapped when I finished. They did not need to. A woman across the table whispered, "That is exactly how I feel." Another pressed my hand and said, "You did not just survive. You made space for us." Their words planted something new inside me. Healing did not mean forgetting. It meant using the pain as mortar to build something stronger. As weeks turned into months, the bruises faded and my ribs mended. The house began to look alive again with fresh paint curtains I chose myself, photos of Mom and me restored to their rightful places. Each corner I touched became an act of defiance against the years of erasure. The anger that once burned hot inside me cooled into resolve. I no longer needed revenge. I had justice. I had truth. And I had visibility. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the porch in gold, I whispered to the quiet rooms. Sometimes the deepest wounds come from family, but standing up and speaking out is how we take our lives back. The air seemed to hold the words, pressing them into the walls like new foundations. I thought of the audience who might one day hear my story, people who had been erased by their own blood and told they did not matter. To them, I wanted to say, "You do matter. You deserve to be seen." And I wanted to leave them with the question that had carried me through the fire. Have you ever been erased by your own family?